Yeah, thanks, Dorian. Let's take a look at that. The French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, is proposing that those perpetrating the violence should be banned from travelling to the EU. And the EU is also exploring the possibility of an arms embargo and asset freezes. And earlier, the German foreign minister gave his reaction.
If the
Libyan leadership continues to use violence against its own people, sanctions will be inevitable. I welcome the fact that more and more countries in the international community are joining this position.
Well, of course, with all this going on, governments are scrambling to launch evacuations of their citizens in Libya. The Libyan government has provided limited cooperation. With 25,000 citizens in Libya, Turkey is mounting the largest evacuation in its history, while also fielding requests for help from other governments. The EU is evacuating 10,000 of its citizens by sea and by air. India made plans to evacuate 18,000 Indian citizens to neighbouring Tunisia and Egypt, but is still waiting for air and sea clearance. The US State Department says there are several thousand American citizens in the country, but it had not received permission to evacuate via air charters. So the first ferry holding up to 575 Americans departed by sea, and that was on Wednesday. And Chinese state media reported that 30,000 Chinese nationals are in Libya. Greek ships headed to the country are prepared to collect apparently half of this number. Well, while other governments wait for Libyan permission to evacuate, foreign nationals who've already managed to return home are relieved to have the experience behind them, of course. Neve Barker has this from Moscow.
Touching down in Tripoli, a French military plane arrives to evacuate foreign citizens stranded in Libya. Several nations have organised emergency flights.
We're taking every action to get the remaining British nationals in Libya out of harm's way. We're greatly concerned about the loss of life in Libya and their government's failure to protect its own people. Indeed, the behaviour of their government in launching attacks on their own people.
Plane loads of passengers are now returning to cities across the continent. At Frankfurt Airport in Germany, evacuees expressed their relief at being out of Libya. With ordinary commercial flights hit by cancellations, many describe the scene at Tripoli's main airport as desperate.
Today in the airport was an absolute chaos. Many people from North Africa trying to leave and get home, thousands, and that was it.
For many, the island of Malta has become the nearest safe destination for those fleeing the violence. More than 500 Russians are also on their way home, many of them specialists working in the oil and construction industries. They bring with them eyewitness accounts of the turmoil.
At night, they would sometimes shoot a lot. We wanted to leave in the morning, but there was a huge crowd, so we flew out at night.
Like many Western powers, Russia has been keen to establish a foothold in Libya. But as the nation descends into chaos, the only option left is to flee. Neve Barker, AlJazeera, Moscow.
Well, Italy has warned the Libyan uprising could spark a refugee crisis. Its government fears that hundreds of thousands of people will try to cross the Mediterranean to get to Europe. And at a meeting of EU interior ministers in the Italian capital, Rome, the government called for help from its partners. Here's Harry Smith.
Once again, they demonstrate outside the Libyan embassy in Rome. These are Libyan expatriates forced out of their country by Colonel Gaddafi. Their message is clear. They will stay here until Gaddafi himself is forced to go.
The wall of fear is fallen. The spring of youth has begun in the Arab world.
Across the city, the interior ministers of 6 European countries with Mediterranean borders meet to work out how to deal with an influx of refugees fleeing the turmoil in North Africa. It's a problem the Italians are all too aware of. They've already had to cope with thousands of Tunisians trying to escape from the chaos that has gripped that country. The United Nations is also gearing up for another flood of refugees.
It is a treacherous journey, of course, and it is a treacherous journey also because the type of boats that people have been known to be using in the past are small dinghies, little boats that are not really very seaworthy, and we know that many, thousands of people have drowned in the Mediterranean.
Across Europe, leaders have been reacting to events, some calling for sanctions against Libya.
There has been conversations in the UN and in the UN Security Council. And there was a presidential statement last night that said just how unacceptable this was. and that all countries should condemn this sort of violence. Would I like us to go further and have a full United Nations Security Council resolution? Yes, I would.
Quindi credo che sia.
I think for us the fundamental thing is to say no to violence, but we also need to be careful with regards to what will happen. We, along with other countries, have had relations with these people in power, which we're interested in for many reasons, and that they supply energy.
But this is not just a crisis which affects those European countries which have a border onto the Mediterranean. It goes much further than that, which is why this meeting in Rome will be followed up on Thursday by a meeting with ministers from all 27 European countries. They're agreed on only two things. It's a very unpredictable situation, but they desperately need a coordinated approach. Harry Smith, Al Jazeera, Rome.
And that's all the international reaction to the Libyan uprising for now. From Washington, it's back to you, Doreen.
All right, Nick, so from the international reaction to we can take a look at what social media sites are saying about the unrest in Libya, and over to Emike at our web desk with more on that. Emike.
Thanks, Doreen. Just looking at pictures this time around, and the way the kind of content that's coming out is shifting. So far, we've seen amateur video footage of the demonstrations, alleged mercenaries, attacks on protesters. Now we're getting more from inside hospitals and morgues, showing the dead and the kind of injuries they've sustained. We can't show all of what's being posted online because some are just too graphic. Workers at this morgue are keen to show the bullet wounds on corpses brought in. It was filmed a few days ago, but only recently posted on YouTube by a user called Save Libya. This one claims to show a mass burial site in the capital Tripoli. It also looks like a funeral is taking place, and you can see men preparing more graves in anticipation of dead bodies. It's difficult to verify all of the videos being posted online. Two more interesting ones selected from the video sharing site YouTube, starting with the most recent. Posted within hours, this purports to show an elderly woman celebrating the so-called liberation of the city of Benghazi. The next one, quite telling if you ask me. It claims to show diplomats at the Libyan embassy in Rabat in Morocco. Now, after tearing down the flag, ripping it to pieces and shouting, "God is great," watch what happens. A man grabs a photograph of Gaddafi as colleagues watch, saying, quote, "He's using planes to kill his people and he's killing children." That's it for now. Back to you, Doreen.
All right, Emike, thank you very much for that. Well, we're following developments for you on Libya, but here's what's coming up. World tennis #1, Caroline Wozniacki, is safely through to round 3 in Qatar, but find out which 3 top seeds tumbled out in the second round in Doha. And Pakistan's captain puts on a 5-star performance in his side's first World Cup match. That's also coming up.